community in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm delighted to be discussing this topic with one of the pioneers of this revolution, Irving Wladawsky-Berger. Irving spent close to 40 years at IBM, where he worked to lead the company's innovation in a few small things that you might have heard of, like the internet, supercomputing, and Linux. Since then, he has consulted to HBO, to MasterCard, and to Citi. And these days, he's primarily a researcher at MIT, although you do also wear a few other hats. Let's start with the general. Irving, is this the fourth industrial revolution, and what does that even mean?
Okay. Well, before I answer the question, let me first say what a pleasure it is to be back at a FINNOSUMMIT event and to be back in Mexico, a country I've been visiting since my second year of university in 1963. It's always great to be here. The fourth industrial revolution is a topic that was defined by the World Economic Forum, and in particular, its leader, Klaus Schwab, wrote a book about it. The first industrial revolution, according to the way they talked about it, was what we associate with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century, with the advent of steam power and new tools, the beginning of automation, and so on. The second industrial revolution took place about 100 years later in the late 19th century and then the early 20th century, when we saw the advent of electricity, steel, chemical engineering, which of course all led to later the internal combustion engine, the automobile, airplanes, and so on. The third industrial revolution, they said, was the beginning of computers, more or less in the 1950s, 1960s, which has been going on for the last 50 years, which brings us to the fourth industrial revolution, which is the future, and it's marked by some very interesting emerging technologies, big data and analytics, artificial intelligence, cognitive computing, 3D manufacturing, Internet of Things, and so on. And obviously it's open-ended since we don't know where it's going to lead.
Would you say that the process of digitization is sort of fueling this revolution?
No question. I think that the third revolution, which is really when digitization and computing started, is really what is generating much of the data that not much of the data, just about all the data that we use for analytics and big data. You know, our interactions online, all the transactions we go through, our smartphones and all the GPS things they run around, and on and on and on. And I won't bore you with saying how much data we get every day, and you know, it's like going between here and the moon, maybe it's Mars this day. It's just a humongous number. And then what is fascinating is what in the world are we going to do to extract insights from all that data, and that's where analytics comes in, that's where artificial intelligence comes in. And what's fascinating about that subject, I think there are two things in particular that I find fascinating. The first one is getting a lot of data and analyzing to extract knowledge out of it is what the world of science has been all about for the last several hundred years. So to a physicist, by the way, that was the field of study in school for me, big data is, well, that's what you do, you know? You get a lot of data and you're analyzing it. What is new is that you can now apply the scientific method to just about all disciplines. Social sciences, the humanities, obviously medicine, on and on and on and on, which means you can quantify and transform previously quote-unquote soft disciplines into much harder, and by hard I just mean quantitative and based on scientific principles, disciplines that feels like a gigantic deal, but for the very early stages.
So talk about the difference between data analytics per se and AI, artificial intelligence.
I view that as a spectrum. And we've been doing data analytics, well, in the scientific world, let's say when you read about that physicists found the Higgs boson, whatever it is, that's data mining, data analytics, and as I said, it's been doing it for a long time. Now, data analytics is beginning to apply a lot of the same techniques to now the data that we get from human behaviors, from human interactions. One of the people I work with at MIT, Professor Sandy Pentland, describes it as we can now take the little breadcrumbs we all leave behind in our daily life, and from the little breadcrumbs that huge numbers of people leave behind, we can start extracting data that tells us about the behavior of groups, and on and on and on and on. When you get to AI, you just start adding more, let me say, sophisticated algorithms. For example, and this is a very interesting evolution of AI. In the early days of AI, we thought we could program intelligence. But the early days, I mean, 1960s, 70s, 80s, we said, you know, you write these programs, rules-based programs, and so on, and now the computer analyzes it and does all this stuff. What people discovered is that to write a program, you have to know the details of what the program is about. So you want to write a program about banking transactions, piece of cake. Somebody designs how the banking transaction works and you program it. You want to write a program about some scientific computation, same thing. You want to write a program about intelligence. You say, Irving, write me a program that recognizes a cat from a picture. Well, I don't know how to do that. Because, well, Irving, don't you recognize cats? Yeah, of course, I do that, but I don't know how I do that. I don't know when I see Katie, how do I know, oh, this is Katie? And therefore, we don't know how to write that program. And that was a real shock to the people doing AI research. And in the 1980s, the field almost crashed in something called the AI winter. But then we discovered a brute force method to do intelligence. If you get a lot of data and you have algorithms that are trained from the way that data has behaved in the past, then the algorithms, quote unquote, learn by themselves.
This is the machine learning aspect of it.
This is the machine learning aspect, exactly. And if you say, well, how does the machine learn? Well, because you give it gigantic numbers of pictures of things. And with the ones that have a cat, you say cat. And with the ones that have a banana or a dog or an elephant, you say not cat. And eventually, it's up to the machine to program itself and learn from that stuff. And what's so interesting is you could say, well, but wait a second. You know, like 3-month-old infants sort of learn how to do that. But here is the difference. When the machine starts doing this, it's like an empty tabula rasa. The 3-month infant has millions of years of evolution that have shaped his or her brain. So we are born with something that makes it much easier for us to recognize things that are critical to our survival.
We have some basic framework in there already.
We have some basic framework. And one of the things that's fascinating in this study of artificial intelligence, and in fact MIT has launched a real major initiative here, is that there are two fields that are helping each other understand this. One is artificial intelligence, sort of how can we teach computers how to do that, and deep learning and so on. The other one is brain science, is cognitive science, which is how do we do that? What is it in the brain that allows the 3-month-old or the 1-year-old to absorb so much knowledge? And the hope is that they help each other. Now, when I say the hope, I mean, if you say, well, when are we going to be there? You know, now we're into real research. So there is a huge amount to do, which everybody in this auditorium should be delighted, because that means there is a lot of work for everybody here for decades.
So everybody here is particularly in financial services. Let's talk a little bit about the applications of AI for financial services.
Yes.
What are the implications for financial services?
There are huge. We have sort of what we call robotics advice to give financial advice to people. And you can have tools that help people say, based on past behavior, these are the kinds of things you could do. Now, as you all know, giving financial advice is actually quite sophisticated. And I think when it comes to things that are very sophisticated, like financial advice or healthcare, rather than saying, okay, we'll get rid of the financial advisor or we'll get rid of the doctor, the best way to look at this, no, what you're doing is developing a tool that will make the financial advisor a much better advisor, and that will make the doctor a much better doctor. It's like you and I were discussing, if you're a taxi driver, you can have memorized Mexico.
Or say you've memorized Mexico.
Or I say you've memorized Mexico, but it's far better to have done that, but still have a navigation application that can detect traffic, and that if you don't know exactly where the Centro Cultural is, it will head you there. So a lot of...
It's a question of augmentation rather than replacement.
Exactly. My view is it's primarily a way of augmentation for really complex subjects. For easier subjects that are more routine, you can start developing all kinds of new processes that actually truly automate what people were doing. One of the most exciting applications that I've learned, in fact, I was talking to a young man about it this morning, is that how does a bank decide whether you are risk-worthy to give a loan, or if they want to give you a loan, what interest rates they should charge you? If we have had a credit history because we've had an affiliation with a bank or credit card company for many years, we will generally do quite well because they have a lot of information. If you come from more humble origins and you don't have that credit history, you may not get the loan, or if you get the loan, what we call comprar a plazos, meaning you're buying in stages, they will charge you a very high interest rate, and they will say, well, Irving, I'm taking a big risk. So one of these things that fintech startups are doing is try to get a better prediction whether a poorer person is the kind of person who will pay their loans or not, based on all kinds of data. And one of the fascinating areas that one of the professors in MIT I work with, Sandy Pentland, has been investigating, which is how do you apply data to better understand and predict human behavior, which is taking us to a whole new level of artificial intelligence, which is really emerging. So, and that, by the way, that's very difficult because there is a difference between machine translation and predicting human behavior. Why is that? Well, in machine translation, you're taking, let's say, English to Spanish. You know, the grammar of English changes slowly. The grammar of Spanish changes slowly. The vocabulary in English and in Spanish. So you have gigantic amounts of data, and then you can train the deep learning thing with that data. Human behavior is the opposite. It's very dynamic. It changes all the time. There are unintended consequences of, you know, why is that? Well, because we're human. You know, we change our mind. We do this. We were living in the US. We decided to move to Mexico. And if you had to keep retraining the machine learning algorithm every time a human changes their behavior, you know, the poor algorithm would say, give me a break.
But this is effectively what social physics is trying to do.
That's what they're trying to do. See if there are some principles that you can superimpose on top of the gigantic amounts of data that will detect certain signals in human behavior. And I think that's a major next step in artificial intelligence, which we're just starting, is to see, are there principles of human behavior? Now, there have to be principles of human behavior. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. That is, you know, evolution is about as elegant a theory as there is, evolution and natural selection, because it provides a relatively elegant explanation to this incredibly complex stuff. And so we're almost trying to reverse engineer evolution. And let's say part of the work of Sandy Pentland is to say, you know, humans from millions of years lived in groups. So they learn from groups. So there is something in the brain of humans that learns from each other. Because if you learn from each other, you adapt to changing conditions. Mm-hmm. Which, you know, the poor dinosaurs were not able to do that because their brains were not like that. But humans are pretty good at that. No, not just humans. I think other mammals and so on. And can we start extracting some of that through different principles, analyzing behaviors, analyzing data? And if you said, oh, so you mean humans are just totally tribal, they follow each other? Yes, that's true, but then you need to inject some innovation in that. Because if things change, you need new ways of behaving. So there is kind of a Goldilocks principle where, yes, you want social behavior, but you want to inject independent innovation. Again, all this is just another way of saying, for all of you doing fintech startups, there is so much to learn, so much to do as we go forward.
Right, this is going to be a really dynamic area of
growth. It is
about
as exciting. It's about as exciting as it comes.
Is it too soon for say, a new payments company or a new lending company or an established bank to start thinking about social physics?
No, I think that this is part of the innovation, because, and this gets back to natural selection. You can say, well, if you can get all banks to agree to stop innovating, maybe you can do that. Or if you can get all startups to say, okay, we won't go there, it's too new. But we know that's not the way it works. You know, the marketplace thrives on innovation. So if you hold back and your competitors are moving forward, even though you can say, well, but maybe 9 out of 10 will fail, yeah, but if you have a thriving startup community like we have in Mexico, we have in a number of places in the US, you know, 10% of 10,000 is 100. So I think it's very good to get on the learning curve and to start trying to figure it out. At the same time, you may be doing things that are more understood because you do need to generate cash while you're learning about the future.
What are some of the other technologies that you think people in this room should be thinking about as drivers of innovation in the coming 5 or 10 years?
I am quite interested in blockchain technologies, and the way I look at blockchain is it's sort of the evolution of business process reengineering and business process innovation. When IT first came on the scene in, 1960s and so on, then we used IT to replace the existing manual processes. So banks kept track of deposits in, let me say, a paper ledger or something like that. So instead of a paper ledger, you created software for transaction processing and databases, and now you can do the ledger more efficiently. Same with inventory management and other things. But then 20 years later, people say, gee, we did all this, but the productivity hasn't improved. And the answer is, well, it's not enough to apply technology. You actually have to re-engineer your business model. Because if all you're doing is doing the same old things, automating parts, the parts you haven't automated will just slow you way down. So in the 90s, we had the whole re-engineering the corporation process, where people went through ERP and HR automation and so on like that. So we automated the processes within the company. But more and more, you see that business is being done around the world among ecosystems of companies. Think about supply chain. Think about the financial industry where, you know, you have to deal with all kinds of banks and in trading and things like that. And every one of those institutions does things within the institution really well. But when it comes to their multi-institutional activities, they are where we were within an institution 30 years ago. And so it takes an incredible, we call it bureaucracy,
Right.
but it's really administrative overhead. And if you say get rid of it, yeah, get rid of it, there goes the whole goddamn supply chain. So what blockchain is trying to help us do is develop technologies like securely shared data, which is what a blockchain does, so that all these ecosystem companies are able to better transact with each other. If you ask me, well, Irving, so 5 years? No. We don't transform the world's economy in 5 years. How long? I think if you're going to transform the world economy, and this is a lesson we learned in the dot-com bubble, how about a few decades?
But already we're seeing banks and we're seeing startups working with blockchain technology.
They are, because they're getting on the learning curve. And let's not confuse getting on the learning curve with full production where everything works really nicely. And that takes time. The way I almost think about it, like you have this incredibly athletic little kid, and you say, this little girl, this little boy, next thing you know, they are in Wimbledon or they are in then the kid is 5, They have a lot of promise, but how about giving them a break, let them grow up, let them get better. Let's go back and look at the kid at 15 and look at the kid at 20. And we could be saying the same thing, whether we're talking about, becoming, the next Ronaldo or Messi or the next, great ballet dancer. It really takes a while. And the early promise is wonderful, but sometimes early promises don't quite work out. That's definitely true with technologies. So let's continue the work, let's continue the research, let's continue the experimentation, but let's not hype it and become so impatient that everybody out there sort of said, oh God, this is hype and nothing else.
I might say you're a bit late to tell people not to hype up blockchain because it seems like the hype is out of control with blockchain.
Well,
so are you optimistic that though it can translate into something tangible?
No.
Effective
And the reason I'm optimistic, and this is true for the internet and for AI, is because when I look around, the best and brightest I know are working on the damn thing. So it's not that I'm optimistic because, I went to the mountain, I smoked something, I came back, and I'm delighted, is because when you see research going on in big companies, you see the startup communities doing a lot of experimentation, you look around at the top universities, and they are all doing things in this area. That tells me that something very good will happen, because those are the leading indicators. The people that are attracting, all these people here doing fintech startups, they're very smart. They got a very good education. They know what's going on in the world. They want to make it big. And that's why I feel positive. What direction will it take? Will it turn right or left or whatever? Of course it will. But I feel, very optimistic that we'll work it out and good things will happen. And let me say 15 years from now, we will have applied these technologies to make doing business across global institutions, and I'm including government here, far more reliable. By the way, business among global institutions, one very good example is, as you and I were delighted when we landed here, and now we can go through immigration by putting our passport in the machine and not wait 1.5 hours. And that's because they have begun to learn how to apply technology, and let's say the more different countries share information about the passengers and so on, the more it helps the process. But to do that, they need an incredibly secure, highly encrypted way of doing that, and that's what these technologies are doing.
Final question, we've got just over a minute left. What do you see as the biggest challenge in the fourth industrial revolution, the biggest challenge to be?
I honestly think is prioritizing and trying to keep it simple. That is, don't try to transform the world all at once. I mean, when we were doing the internet strategy in IBM, we always say, start simple, grow fast. Find the simplest applications you can find and start implementing them. You say, well, but it's too simple. No. It may be too simple to you, but to somebody else, it may look like magic. And the fact that it's simple means you know how to implement it. Well, if you know how to implement it, do so take it to the marketplace and see if the dogs will eat the dog food. Obviously, how well it does in the marketplace. That's a major innovation in and of itself. How to simplify a complex idea so that you can build it, start experimenting, and then be able to explain it to your clients, even if they don't have, you know, an advanced degree in whatever it is you're trying to explain.
Start with those quick, easy wins, but start.
Start and then incrementally keep adding and adding and adding. And 10 years from now, you look back and you say, my God, look what we did. But you didn't notice it because each step built on the previous steps.
Irving's recipe for success. All right, look, thank you so much for your perspectives and your comments and speaking to us. Please join me giving Irving a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.